Okay, guys, so number 2 for the day. I want to try to get more up there. I want to try to get through this book. I want to try to get through all the magazines. I want to get as many of these done as I can. All these informational videos. So, like, what I have is my pins. Alright, so here we go. Stockpiling Forage. This is by Joel Salatin. Besides laying in human food for the winter, you need to think about laying in animal food if you have livestock. While grains for the chickens and pigs are fairly straightforward, the herbivores pose a different challenge due to hay bulkiness. My hair's bugging me. Need to get it cut. Many homesteads rock along while the logistics of I can't talk. Many homesteads rock along well until the logistics of acquiring, storing, and then paying for the hay hits home. Suddenly, those cows, sheep, and goats look like a land yacht rather than the meat and milk provision we envisioned. I'll get to hay later in this column, but first I'm going to do all I can to explain how to minimize hay. And there is a way to do that. It starts with what's known as stockpiling. Usually it starts with a grazing plan, but let's deal with the concept of stockpiling first. Too many homesteads have a small pasture dedicated to their handful of herbivores, and when the grass runs out, the hay comes in. The biggest economic game changer on a homestead with herbivores is going from grazing on available forage to eating hay. The fewer days we feed hay, the cheaper herbivore keeping becomes. Hay is the single biggest cost in keeping herbivores. The key to reducing hay consumption is to stockpile forage going into winter. Believe it or not, brown, frosted, frozen grass is plenty nutritious to keep the animals satisfied. You won't want to have babies on that forage, but to maintain through the dormant season, it's quite acceptable. Sorry, there was a fly on the camera. Every blade of forage the animals can harvest themselves is a blade you don't have to buy, haul, store, and carry to them. In North America, nearly all forage growth curves have two homes. One in the spring and another smaller one in the fall. The dip between those two humps is called the summer slump. The key to stockpiling dormant season forage is to pull the animals off designated areas and let that grass accumulate in the fall. Excluding animals from that area allows the forage in its full expression late in the season. The cold winter tends to preserve the forage, kind of like freezing vegetables. It may look brown and unappetizing, but it's actually quite palatable and nutritious. More discoveries about historical bison grazing, again, I can't talk, patterns indicate that rather than migrating from north to south to winter in warm areas and summer in cold areas, the herds actually wintered in the north. They enjoyed the comfort of cold with no flies. The prairie grasses essentially freeze-dried and fed the herds during the cold winters. Creating an exclusion obviously requires a fencing subdivision. The most common response I receive when introducing planned intensive grazing to homesteaders is, "I don't have enough acreage for that." Ecological grazing and deferred stockpiling have nothing to do with size. They have everything to do with management. These principles are completely size neutral. Grass grows in an S-curve, meaning it starts slow, gains leaf area and expanded solar panel, and accelerates, then slows down again as it reaches senescence. For most forage species, that entire growth cycle happens in fewer than 70 days. Obviously, many things can affect the growth rate: heat, cold, drought, and flood, any extreme changes in the start to finish timing of that growth cycle. The goal of any herbivore caretaker is to prune the forage prior to senescence, but well after that initial immature growth period, making sure the plant and animal do not mirror until do not meet until after that accelerating period of growth. We do this with an electric fence. Some of the fencing is permanent and some is mobile. Remember, we also have the solar electric fence that Andrew has. It's 400 foot of fencing. So that's going to come in handy. We'll probably end up using that for our goats. Because we are still going to do dairy goats. Some of the fencing is permanent and some is mobile. Each species has a different fencing requirement. Cows are the easiest and goats are the most difficult. Cows respect a single wire quite well, whereas goats generally need at least 3 wires or an electrified netting. In this column, I'm not going to dive into fencing infrastructure. Just realize that controlling the animals is the key to being able to place the right number on the right area for the right reason, for the right time. Whether you're running 2 cows or 1,000, the key to forage production is strategically timed, pruning at the front end and then not allowing the animals to stay long enough to nip the new regrowth on the back end. In most cases, this is anywhere from 1 to 4 days. Yes, that means moving your animals rapidly and not allowing them to stay in the same spot. Once nipped, the forage sends up regrowth. If that is nipped, the plant becomes weaker. On the one hand, and on the other hand, becomes weaker on the one hand, and on the other hand, doesn't experience that accelerated growth period between new shoot and sustenance. Electric fencing control then becomes a steering wheel accelerator and brake on that 4-legged prune. I like to use the word prune rather than graze because I think it better captures the essence of what the animals do. Yes, they graze, but the whole point is pruning. Slice. Grazing tends to concentrate our thinking on the benefits to the animals. Pruning tends to move our thinking to the entire plant, community, soil, and how the animal benefits the ecology. Nobody would go out willy-nilly with pruning shears and start whacking apple trees or grapevines, and yet that is exactly the way most people use their livestock on the forages. The livestock should be seen as a precision pruning mechanism that we wield with the same care and attention as a zero-turn mower on a golf course. By moving the stock across the pasture in these little blocks called paddocks, we create a forage maturity mosaic. What's more, we develop mastery at being able to inventory the standing forage. On our farm, we measure it in cow days per acre since we have cows. About 7 sheep equal 1 cow just for reference. By keeping some rudimentary records of your cow days per acre, very quickly you'll learn how to read the available forage. If you have 2 cow equivalents, you have 30 cow days per acre of grass. You'll need 1/15th of an acre per day. If you move them every other day, you'll need about 1/7 of an acre for the 2 days. An acre is about 5,000 square yards, so 1/7 of 5,000 is about 700. Rounding is plenty exact for these off-the-cuff calculations. So what do 700 square yards look like? It could be 35 by 20 or 10 by 70 or 30 by 23 or 26 by 27. The more square, the more even the pruning. By knowing the animal units you have and the area you give them each time, you'll quickly be able to look at a spot and say, that's 30 cow days forage. Or that's a 45 cow days forage. You can inventory the standing forage just like you would inventory bales of hay in the barn. You know a cow will eat about 28 pounds of hay per day if she weighs around 1,000 pounds. If she weighs a lot more, she'll eat a lot more. I like small cows. You can figure with quite a bit of accuracy how much hay you need per day or per week to feed your herd or flock. The same precision can be applied to standing forage as you manage your pruners through the pasture. When the fall rains come and you get that bump in the fall, you can exclude a portion of pasture and let it grow as tall as it can going into winter. In our area, the average farm feeds 120 days per year. The average farm feeds hay 120 days per year, sorry. On our farm, even though we're running twice as many animals per acre as the norm, we only feed on average 40 days per year. That's the beauty and potential of the stockpiling controlled pruning technique. The higher your rainfall and more temperate your climate, the more rotations you can make on the same area each season. In extremely dry areas like Nevada, bleh, or places with extremely short growing seasons like Wyoming and Montana, you may only graze a given spot 2 times a year. Or maybe even once. Irrigation changes that, of course. You don't have to be a big outfit to do this. Our cows routinely eat through nearly a foot of snow. If the snow gets deeper than that, then we feed hay. But animals are extremely resourceful if they have access to their own groceries. Nobody brought hay to the bison, elk, and other herbivores on the Great American Plains. They figured out how to get through the winters before they knew December 25th was Christmas. Our livestock are close cousins if we don't coddle them too much. They'll be extremely content on stockpiled forage. In inclement weather, bringing them in is certainly a good thing to do, but animals can handle substantial cold going into winter. Think about how eager the animals are, even on a cold day, to go outside. If they go outside to forage rather than tromp around in an overgrazed moonscape, they'll be much happier, and our pocketbooks will be in better shape as well. We homesteaders often engage in vilifying beef feedlots, confinement livestock operations, overgrazing, and other ills if the big guys have a lock on mismanagement. In general, many of the worst cases of overgrazing I've ever seen have been on micro farms and homesteads. Our growing season grazing program sets the stage for how long we can let the animals graze into the winter. That, in turn, determines how much time we'll spend hauling hay and how much we'll spend on acquiring that hay. Not only does this short-term controlled grazing approach yield more forage during the growing season, but it also yields a stockpile going into cold weather. Twofers are great in any arena. Joel Salatin and his family own Polyface Farm in Virginia's Shenandoah Valley. He has authored 15 books and speaks all over the world about agriculture and culture. To keep up with him and the farm, visit www.polyfacefarms.com. And that was it. Stockpiling Forage. And I will go ahead and get this up there, and I will see you guys on the next one. I will see you guys in a minute. Bye, guys.